I'm Trey. How are you? Thanks for joining me for this. I've never done anything quite like this, but just recently, just over a week ago, we had this 4-day photography adventure down here in New Zealand. And over those 4 days, I took well over 1,000 photos, and I came away with what I feel like are 36 keepers. So I feel like this was a really good 4 days, and I was taking photos constantly. And I thought you might like to see these final 36 photos I produced, and I was going to talk through them a little bit and why I think these are interesting or why I like them, and I'll talk a little bit about the process. And I think this would be a really fun way to start out the entire video. So this would be sort of like the tip of the iceberg. And as we get deeper and deeper into the video, you'll see more how these shots were done, and kind of walk around with me and see the conditions when I took them, and also see how I went through them step by step in the post-processing. So anyway, let's take a look here. Excuse me while I find what's happening in my dock down here. Okay, here we go. We have iPhoto. This is sort of the final resting spot of all my shots, and we'll just go through all 36 right now so I can show you what I was thinking and kind of how these came into fruition. So this was taken on the fourth day. We had some very nice slow motion sunset, like almost all the sunsets are down here when you get around the 45th degree of latitude and beyond. The sunsets are quite slow motion because the sun kind of slides in kind of sideways like A-Rod in the second base. Instead of other places, closer to the equator, the sun basically shoots straight down into the water or into the horizon. But here you get these long 2, 3, 4 hour sunset sessions. So you can kind of take your time and get many different compositions. And I think that's what you'll see as we go through a lot of these. You'll see other shots from this field in various compositions as the clouds are moving across the sky. And this is one thing I like to do. I like to shoot and then move and shoot and move. I do a lot of that. I don't stand in one place too long because it's a challenge for me to try to use a landscape to get as many different compositions as possible. So, okay, here's a shot. Here's another one. And later in the tutorial, you'll see a full step-by-step scene of how I did this. I go through Lightroom and Photoshop, and you see how I put together the final shot. This is from down in Milford Sound. Again, I have many shots from here, and I think I probably have about 3 or 4 that have made it into my final 36. So this is one of those compositions that I came away with. This is from the top of Deer Park Heights at sunset. We had these lovely fields, and the grasses were blowing, and the sun was setting, and it was just a really nice scene. And this is another photo where you're going to get to see the entire step-by-step process in the full tutorial. And this one is actually the one that I start with, and I go very, very slow on it. So I kind of show you what all the sliders do in Lightroom and why I use the sliders I did. And then I even go into Photoshop, and I show you some of the basics of Photoshop and how I mix together the final images. And I spend some time in Photomatix and show you how I create the HDR part of it all. So you'll get to know this image very, very well and see exactly how it was made. This is an image from Queenstown Gardens. I think we took on the first or second day. And here, I actually had a much bigger crop to begin with. It was quite huge. And I ended up cropping down and thin and keeping most of the emphasis on the reflection here off the water, because I felt like that was much more, Monet, water lilies, impressionistic, and that felt good. In fact, let me show you the originals. Let me jump over here to Lightroom. You can see that even after I deleted some of the really horrible ones, there were still 1,171 photos left. So let me scroll through here until I get to these Queenstown Gardens ones. Here they are. Oh, here we go. So here we are. So this is how the image kind of started out in Lightroom. And this one actually had very little HDR, if any, in it. And you can see the final version is this one, where I really cropped down and got rid of a lot of the noise up top, and I kept these simple lines along the bottom. Here's another one. This is Bowen Falls. We had a nice reflection. And you'll also get to see a very detailed step-by-step tutorial on this one as well, showing how I go through Lightroom and move all the sliders around and Photomatics and Photoshop, and you'll just see the whole shoot and match. So there should be no questions at the end of that one. This is my favorite fire dancer shot. I took many at different exposures, at different speeds, and this is about the length of time that I like. I don't mind that the guy is a little blurred. I think that's cool. You know, I could have used a flash to pop it and make sure that he was perfectly, well lit and well defined, but I don't mind a blurry fire dancer. I think it's kind of cool sometimes. And I actually just ran one simple filter on this one, and it was, I don't know if you have these Trey's Lightroom presets or not, but this is it right here. So there's this one preset. Let me just jump into the develop module right here. And it's one of my favorite presets. I use it quite a bit. It's called Dramatic Chippy. So that's kind of what I ran on this one, and we got that kind of cool look. All right, what's next here? So this is from those beautiful fields, and I kind of set this one up. This was with my wide angle lens. This was a Nikon 14-24. I set it up so that my sun was over here on the right, because I do like to include the sun when I can. This is one of the great things about shooting in HDR is you actually get to include the sun, and you get all the details that are over here that are normally on the shadowy side of the hay. Normally you get to kind of expose for the sun or the hay, but not both. But of course, with HDR, you get to do the stuff that your human eye can do, and you can see all this when you're out there. So that's kind of why I chose this composition. I really like the way it felt. And I always like these leading lines that kind of point off in different directions and get your eye moving around and this sort of thing. And I tried to keep a few of the inky black spots on the shadowy side, because I think some of the inky black helps to anchor the eye. Here's another one. We took a drive out to Glenorchy, and the sky was actually quite plain this night. It was a horrible sunset. It was okay, but it was just a little blah. And so I was processing these and doing HDR and all that, shoot and match. And I thought, well, I think this is actually more about the lines and the contrast and the shapes. So I ran it through Nik's Silver FX Pro, and I ended up quite liking this sort of high contrast version. This is from the first morning. We had this really sort of unusual situation where the sun was rising behind the Remarkables here, and it was making this very unusual kind of reverse halo. And I just love the way it turned out. This has a little bit of HDR in it. If you look close, you can see a little bit of detail in the trees, not too much. We could have done a lot more, but to me it becomes a little bit more flatly lit. And if this all is perfectly well exposed, maybe this part up top looks less dramatic. Now, after the sun came up, it looked like this. So I pulled back a little bit with a wider angle lens, and I amped up my f-stop so I get this nice sort of starburst effect. The bad part about the shooting at f/22 or whatever I shot this at was I had all this dust everywhere that I had to go clean up. So that took a little while. But this is pretty much, again, a standard 7 exposure HDR shot, because when shooting into the sun, I often go -3 to +3, and that was the case here as well. We did a little session with shooting for a shallow depth of field. This wasn't really a shallow depth of field type workshop, but I do know that once you like photography, you probably also like these kind of shots, either the little objects that you find or flowers or people. It's a nice little trick just to shoot that at a nice shallow depth of field, and you're good to go. Let me just pull up the EXIF on this. So this was ISO 400, shot at 90 millimeter, and f5.3. Okay, and f5.3 was good to get this whole flower in focus. And I could have dropped it even lower to like 2.8 or something. But then the background got a little bit too bokeh'd, and I kind of like it just how it is. Okay. Here is one from the hills. Again, another nice situation where you're shooting into the sun, 7 exposures. And I wanted to keep every place that the sun touched to have a little bit extra of a golden hue, so you can kind of draw this line and have plenty of darkness. You'll notice that I like to have darkness sometimes in my corners and some definition. Down here on this side where the sun doesn't touch, I think it's okay to have darkness in here. Just because you're doing HDR and everything can be perfectly well lit doesn't mean that you should keep everything perfectly well lit. It's your world that you're building here. It's your personality. So whatever you choose to put in there, it's all up to you. So there's not good decisions and bad decisions. They're just, your decisions. Here's another one from the hills. Sort of this nice little rowboat over here on the edge. And this is sort of a very basic HDR treatment. You'll notice sometimes I really amp up the HDR. Sometimes I tone it down. It just depends on my mood and what I feel like the photo treats, what we need in that situation. So, again, it's kind of my world. I play with it the way I want to. And if it feels good to me, I just do it. And I think you should feel the same way. Don't worry about right and wrong. Just go with what feels good to you at that moment. And who knows, in a few years, your taste may change, and that's okay too. This is Bowen Falls, really late at night. It was super rainy when we arrived, and it was really tough shooting out there. And there didn't seem to be much light. There was just a little bit of moonlight way up in the sky. But even when it's really dark, for a nice long exposure, you can still get some nice shapes and have a very moody shot. So that's where this came from. Here's another one from that field with those great clouds, and this is similar to a few others you'll see. I think I have about 4 or 5 from this field and ponds and various situations. And even though this came out similar to some of my other ones, I just couldn't throw it away because I love it. I feel like it came out really nice. Now, one thing that is maybe a little different here in the post-processing is the whole bottom half comes from one of the raw files, and I did a bit of vignetting on it. So you can see how this is vignetted. If I were to use the full HDR version, then the whole lower half would be perfectly well lit. And I kind of I still like these dark corners and adding a bit of drama into the center here. Here's one from the wolves at the hills. And I do kind of like this shot. I don't think it's my favorite, and I do want to go back and shoot these wolves again and again and again. I don't feel like this is the best shot I'll ever get, but I'm pretty happy with it. One thing I did do is I consciously took several steps over here so that the swordsman here would be standing out beyond the mountain. If I was over here, then we might see the swordsman with the mountain behind him. I think it's better to have the sky behind him. Here's one from the top of this wonderful big grassy hill overlooking the Remarkables. And this one has the Remarkables quite heavily HDR'd and quite colorful, and I love it. And then everything else is just much more subtle. So this is a good example of a mixture between extreme HDR and more subtle things. And I tried to make the transition between just the plain Lightroom down here and up here into an extreme HDR to be as subtle as possible so that you can't quite see it until your eyes have drifted past. Here's just sort of a fun shot of the group. I ran one of my quick Lightroom filters on this one, and I thought it felt kind of fun and simple. Here's one from that field again. This is sort of aiming a different direction, a different part of the night. The shapes and everything was so lovely, and I kept the field very subtle and understated. You have to resist that temptation to overamp everything, because sometimes if you look at the difference between a regular ground and an amped up ground, you think, oh, that amped up ground is really nice. But if everything's amped up, then you kind of you can lose something. You don't see the difference between one part that is more interesting than another part. Everything should be interesting, of course, but I think it's okay to have some photos, some parts of one photo be a bit more appealing in a different kind of way, and there to be a little bit of unpredictability as the eye moves around. So here's a photo of the clubhouse there at the Hills. I don't think I really love this photo, actually. I think I just put it in here because I just tried something experimental. What I did is, after I finished the image, is I made another version of it and in Silver FX Pro and put a border on it. And then I overlaid it on top. And that's why you see this sort of weird border effect and this sort of high key effect. I should probably not have this in my final 36. I still can't decide if I like it or not, but I think it's interesting. It's interesting. Here's one from that morning when the sun was coming up over the mountain. And it's actually quite rare for me to show my photos in quick, rapid succession like this, because I like, this is just my own sharing and publishing strategy. I publish these things weeks and months and sometimes years apart. And if I were to post all 3 of these photos where you see the sun coming up over the mountains, it tells a story, but it also tells a little too much of a story, I think. I don't like people to look at a sequence of 3 of my photos and then kind of figure out where I was standing and walking, not because it's a secret, but I just don't want them thinking about the process in which I got into position and the lenses that I chose and the progression of time and this sort of thing. Sometimes when I see a photographer put out several photos of the same subject matter, I find myself thinking too much about the process of them taking the photos than the actual photo. So anyway, that's that. Here's one from the North Korean prison, and this uses one of these Lightroom filters. This is not HDR, just sort of right out of Lightroom. Here's another one of the North Korean prison. You can see it over there on the left. In fact, I'll zoom in here so you can see it even better. There it is. And this is, of course, not a real prison. It's a movie set where they filmed this awful Disney movie in the 80s called The Rescue. I also thought about taking out this little picnic bench down there, but picnic table, but I left it there. But I do kind of like this whole photo. I think it's just interesting and different, and it flows well. Here's a photo I got of Belle. She's our videographer, and she got all the amazing video footage that you'll see later in the full tutorial. So thanks to her. Actually, when I don't really take a lot of people photos when I'm out doing landscapey stuff, but when I do and I get back and I look at them and I play with them, I think, oh, well, that's not so bad. I should do it more. But sometimes I'm just like either in a landscape mode or I'm in a people mode, So anyway, and this uses one of these simple Lightroom filters that are in my presets as well. Here's one I really like. This is from kind of a different perspective on Queenstown. You can see Queenstown over here on the right. And this is Lake Wakatupu. So let me zoom in here. I'll show you something that's going on here with this road. And you'll see we have this road here. It looks like there's all this traffic on the road, doesn't it? It looks like quite a busy road, but this is all actually the exact same car coming down the road. And I saw the car coming around the bend right there. That's when I recognized, I said, I have an idea. And so what I did is I took it off auto bracketing, and I kind of left it on the middle exposure, which was pretty long. I don't know, maybe it's a second or something like that. And I took a whole series of photos as it was coming down, and I masked them all together into one final photo to kind of make this road light up just a little bit. So that's how I accomplished that. But I do love this photo. It's quite wide and not so tall for me, but I do like it. Here's another one of Milford Sound. I did try something a little bit different here. Rather than, you can see there's this bank out here of rocks. Well, I did eventually end up walking out here on this bank of rocks. But rather than going to the forwardmost point, I decided to come back here and incorporate that and just make another line, not quite the horizon, but just something else in there that I thought might be interesting. And also, the water back here was a little bit more still because it was in a bit more of a protected pool than going way out there. All right, so that's that one. Here is an image. This is a dock with a big stone sphere at the end, and we're getting these wonderful sunsets. And you'll notice that the water, there's no ghosting in the water. Sometimes I will use the ghosted water, and that's what comes out of the HDR process, because when you HDR a photo, you end up combining several layers together and you ghost the water. So sometimes that's cool because it gives a sense of motion. But for whatever reason, I just really like the way the water came out here. I think it just feels really nicely balanced and beautiful. And I masked in one of the waters from one of the exposures, and I felt like that felt better for me here. Here's one. This is zoomed in pretty far, and I wanted to get the focus on the mountains and the drama of the clouds and the nice golden field. And there's a little bit of vignetting in here, which I feel like the situation calls for. I end up vignetting my photos quite a bit. I know it's sort of taboo in a lot of photography circles, but I like it. I don't care if it's taboo. This is a single exposure. This is taken from the ship, and there's no way to get a multiple exposure in this situation because the boat I'm on is going one way and their boat's going the other way, and I kind of wanted to get them and these sheer rock walls and and Bowen Falls here all in one shot. And the original version was up quite a bit higher, and you could see the top of that mountain, but I chose to crop down so you couldn't quite see the top of the mountain. I think that adds just a tiny bit more drama when you can't tell if you see the top of the mountain or not. All right. Here's one. This was a 7 exposure HDR across this little river of these really dramatic clouds and fogs that was moving across the mountain here. Here's one of a pond with this just amazing cloud up there, and these are called lenticular clouds, and I think you get them a lot in rocky mountain areas, and this is the first time I've ever really seen them. It's down here in New Zealand, so I don't know if these happen a lot in other places or not, but they really are beautiful. They seem to come through like UFOs every few weeks, and I think HDR is a great way to capture them because you really get all the texture and the detail, and you could just stare at this thing for hours. And I love it. This is a different kind of composition. Usually when I shoot the Remarkables, that's these big rocky mountains back there, I like to get all the Remarkables in. But this time these fields, these oranges and yellows and everything just seem to be nice and flowing, and the Remarkables kind of gave me sort of a different, strange sort of horizon line that followed the hills. And I've never taken a photo quite like it. I'm not totally sure what I think of it, but I do come back to it again and again. I feel like it's got some nice curves to it, and those little subtle clouds up in the sky. That gives some indication of the hills down below. I think that feels nice. Okay, we're getting closer to the end here. This is another quick photo that I took, and this is sort of looking away from the sun, and I love repeating objects, and whenever I get repeating objects, especially in a reflection, I try to use them as best I can. So that's that. Here's another one of those people shots, and when I come back, I feel like I should do more of these things. This is Clayton Morris. The tide had come in, and we were walking back across these rocks, so I quickly switched the mode of my camera out of auto bracketing and kind of amped up my ISO and my shutter speed and this sort of thing. In fact, let's just look at the ISO here to see what's happening. This is at ISO 800, f2.8, 24 millimeter. So I sped up the camera so that I get these quick shots as he was crossing. And this is not HDR or anything. This kind of ran through some of my Lightroom presets. This one, these 2 dolphins. I got this one with a wide-angle lens, so I had my Nikon 14-24 on, and I had it all the way at 14, and I basically was aiming at the horizon. And it's so wide that when you look through the viewfinder, you were able to see the dolphins down there. And I wanted to get the horizon in there as well as like the mountains and everything in Milford Sound. So that's how I was able to compress it all. In fact, the middle part here was still pretty wide apart. So I did some transform warping to make that smaller. In fact, let me just jump over here and see if I can find that one in Lightroom. It'll take me a second. This is one of these action situations where I just took a ton of photos because you never know what was gonna come out. Okay, all right, here we go. So yeah, this is interesting. So it started like this, okay, and I turned it into that. Let me see if I can. Let me put these things side by side here. All right, let me do a little Windows movement here, so you can see the before and after. Okay, make this a little skinnier. Put it side by side. Okay. So yeah, you can see many things have changed here. For one, the horizon is straight. I didn't really mind the tilted horizon. I thought that was kind of cool, but I did decide in my final photo to make the horizon straight. And look at the distance, like between their bottlenose noses and the horizon there, and look how small it is here. That's because I used transform warp to shrink that bit up. And when I shrunk that bit up, it also stretched the dolphins a little bit more. So it made them a little bit more prominent, because here they're occupying a pretty good part of the frame on the left, but over here on the right, you can see they're occupying a very small part of the frame. All right, let me make this thing big again. Oop. Okay, here's the final photo I'll share. This is another wide angle shot. This is a little island that was kind of there and a little hard to see unless you're really kind of paying attention. Sometimes in these situations there's so much to look at, and it's sometimes more than you can take in. So I think it's a good idea just to take a ton of different shots and keep moving and shooting and moving and shooting, and then get back and then like Kenny Rogers says, you can count your chips after the dealing is done. And as you can see, I took well over 1,000 photos, but I don't have that many keepers in here. But of these keepers, I'm glad I did a lot of shooting, because I was able to pull a few out that I felt like were pretty good. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed seeing these, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the videos. Thank you.